So guys, last week, Doctor Who released a second last episode called The Legend of Ruby Sunday, which I was anticipating because, there's a lot of theories. Every episode this season has been basically fantastic, and I was very excited for this two-part finale. And I loved it. I really liked Legend of Ruby Sunday. But, there's still a lot of open-ended questions, so I thought I'd, theorize about a bunch of stuff. And these, I have a slideshow here. It's not very well thought out, okay? In my mind, there's like 4 major questions, I think. For Empire of Death, the next episode, the finale of this season of Doctor Who, the important interrelated questions. So, the first one is who dropped Ruby off at the church on Ruby Road? So this is the central question that has been raised ever since the beginning of this season in the church on Ruby Road, the Christmas special. Who is Ruby's mother? Who is this person? I guess we're just assuming that it's like, firstly, we're assuming it's a woman. We're assuming it's the mother. We're assuming a bunch of things. Like, who is this woman? And then the other sub-question to that is, why did this memory/time, because memory and time are kind of interrelated is what the Doctor says, why did it change? Because, initially, we had the Doctor showing up, seeing Ruby's mum, and then going back. And then, later on, in, I think, Space Babies, we see the same scene, but we see Ruby's mother point at the Doctor. And it's like, oh my god, the memory has changed. What happened? So that's another question. Now, in terms of information we have, I don't know what I actually listed here. We have a bunch, okay? Number one, we know most likely it's a white woman because we see their hand, it's white. We see their figure and they're probably a woman, I don't know. So it looks like one, and everyone in the story is basically assuming it's a woman. So I would just assume it's a white woman, which would, I guess, make sense for Ruby's mother. The other thing we get is that in a revised memory, the one I just talked about, the person here, the woman, we're assumedly, is pointing at something. Now, there's 2 possibilities. Well, there's a few possibilities, but one is that they're most likely pointing to the Doctor and the TARDIS in the actual timeline there, so in 2004. But another thing which is possible, and I think would be more interesting, and I think is probably more likely, which is that she's pointing at the Doctor and Ruby in the time window, telling them to look at the TARDIS to see that Sutekh is there, or something. I don't really know if it's like that simple. Maybe there's something more to it, but I feel like she is communicating something to the Doctor and Ruby in this time window, rather than communicating something to the Doctor, which would, I guess, make little sense there. Yeah, so interesting. The other thing we know is that, this is something I realized. I looked it up afterwards. After I was like, how have I not seen anyone talk about this? And I saw one Reddit thread which had like 50 upvotes or something. It's like a tiny Reddit thread pointing this out. But at the beginning of Church on Ruby Road, something really interesting happens, and it could just be nothing. It could just be like a production error or like a continuity error or something, or just a red herring to intentionally like mix us up or confuse us. But Church on Ruby Road basically starts with us. It's like a monologue by the Doctor, by the 15th Doctor, whatever Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor, whatever this Doctor's title is. He has a monologue where he's talking about how, on one Christmas, blah, 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 child was dropped off, and we didn't know who this mother was or what was happening until one fateful Christmas where a time traveler came to call. And then you have the Doctor arriving, and the Doctor is like crying. He opens the door of the TARDIS. He has like a tear on his cheek, and we're like, okay, so the Doctor does something. And then you have the whole Church on Ruby Road episode, and eventually toward the end of the episode, the Doctor comes back. I don't remember the exact context. I didn't watch the whole episode, but I think he comes back to save like the goblins who'd taken young Ruby or something, and he like goes and saves them. And when he arrives, we see him open the TARDIS door, and it's literally almost identical of the scene. It is a different take, like the actual angles of like behind the TARDIS and the way he's like moving is slightly different, but he's wearing the exact same outfit. It's almost identical. If you didn't put them side by side, you probably wouldn't be able to tell that they're different takes. However, when you focus on his face, there isn't the tear on his cheek, and he's not crying. And it's like, why is this different? Why is the scene that we're seeing now, which is intentionally designed to make us think of the scene at the beginning of the episode, why is it not the same? Now, obviously, it could be continuity error, or it could be, which I think would be really cool, but I feel like I'm almost certain it's got to be a continuity error, but it'd be really cool if this is going to be a scene we see in the final episode where the Doctor has to come back to this moment and make a very difficult decision or something. Like the one I talked about a little bit in the Discord with Miller, which is that it could be the fact that throughout this next episode, the Doctor realizes that Sutekh's appearance, and not appearance in terms of appearance, but like Sutekh showing up and destroying the world or universe or whatever, it could be tied to Ruby's birth. And as long as Ruby exists, or Ruby exists in the current form she does with her family and everything, then Sutekh will always exist and will always come back. And in order to undo that, maybe he has to come back to this moment and make sure that Ruby isn't adopted. Or maybe I would say, oh my god, even make sure Ruby dies or something, but the show would never do that. It's way too dark and they would never do it. But maybe he has to come back to this moment and basically undo the good thing he did of like saving Ruby from the goblins. Or I don't think it'd be that crazy, but something could happen here, which is about the Doctor having to give up Ruby for the sake of the world or something. It would be really interesting. So I don't know if that's in my theory here. I have a bunch of theories, but my most likely to least likely theories on who this woman is, basically, that dropped Ruby off. So the first one, and I think is the most likely, which is that it's a new character who will be introduced next episode. But what I think is, this is like a bunch of stuff that I've talked about throughout this entire slideshow, which is that something that, you know, it's never going to happen because, you know, my theories don't really pan out. They're not very well thought out. But my whole theory with this TARDIS thing, which is that I think Sutekh possessed the TARDIS, expelled the soul of the TARDIS, and put it into this woman, is kind of my theory. This is like my ongoing theory that has very little evidence to support it, but that would make a lot of sense for me. Which is, and it would explain why time is kind of changing, because you have we'll get to this when we get to Mrs. Flood or whatever, but I guess that's my main thing, which is that it's a new character who we haven't met yet. It was literally just a random woman who was literally Ruby's mother, just some random woman who, in the initial timeline, she was walking away, and then when the Doctor comes back to this time, or something happens, I don't know, I think it would probably be in the church on Ruby Road when he comes back for the first time to save her from the goblins. Sutekh somehow takes over, expels the TARDIS into that woman, and the memory changes then, or the whole universe changes then, because the TARDIS has been expelled and put into the woman. Could be interesting. Or the other thing is that it could be the God of Light or the Disciples of Light from the Satan pit. Whoever the opposite of Sutekh is, they could have come in, possessed this woman, and done something to intervene with Sutekh's return or something. That could be interesting, okay? I am interested in that, but I think this is very unlikely, but it would be really fun, and yeah, we'll see. Another potential theory, this is probably a bit less, way less likely, which is that the mother is Mrs. Flood, who is the neighbor, basically, to Ruby, who shows up in this episode and says a storm is coming or whatever, and looks at us. So Mrs. Flood is actually Susan, who is the Doctor's granddaughter, and the whole reason that we brought up firstly, the whole reason we brought up Susan, and the whole reason we brought up the fact that Time Lords have families out of order and grandchildren can come before children, is that Susan is actually Ruby's mother, who is the Doctor's daughter. And I don't know, I don't know what reason how this would even feel satisfying or whatever, but my god, would that be really cool. And it's just something I thought of, so maybe that could happen too. All right, the other thing is, oh no, I think I said this already, which is that the mother is the TARDIS, whose soul was stripped from the TARDIS by Sutekh and placed into Ruby's mother when Sutekh took over the TARDIS. That's basically the same one as the first one. Crazy. Okay. By the way, the best answer to Ruby's mother is to do a literal Last Jedi thing, and she's a nobody. Anything else would suck. Yeah, I think it would be interesting to have a nobody whose life was taken over by the soul of the TARDIS, or like someone possessed them, like some god of light comes down and possesses her, and it's like, damn, that's rough, you know? And I do think that's the most likely, which is that it's just some random character. Like, there's no person, so no intention behind it. It could be a similar parallel to how Sutekh has taken over Susan, a triad, and then on the other hand, you've got the Disciple of Light who's taken over Ruby's mother or something, and the like god of death and the god of life are like fighting each other or something. That could be kind of interesting. And they're fighting it through proxies of innocent people who were just taken over and are suffering because of them. And it could be like the Doctor, who is also some celestial god or something. It could tie back to the timeless child thing, which I don't know that much about. He is the one who, although he is a similar kind of pantheon related thing to these people, he like kind of cares about the people that he interacts with, and because of that he wins. And I don't know, you could do something interesting with that. What if Horus is her mother, Ari? I feel like Horus is not going to be involved in this. As far like my understanding, firstly, Miller's referring to Pyramids of Light, which is the original story that Sutekh was introduced in, which I have seen. I did watch it today. Horus was the one who initially imprisoned Sutekh. Now, I don't know what Horus is. I would assume he's just like another one of the gods, like the Egyptian gods or whatever. Now, I don't know what it is, but it just feels like having Horus here, it just feels so, I don't know, it feels anticlimactic in a way, but I don't know why. I don't know. I guess it could happen. It could be Horus, but it just doesn't feel right to me for some reason. Kind of disappointed that it's not just Satan from the pit. Yeah, I'm not disappointed, but that's initially when they were doing the reveal, the voice was like talking to her head and it sounded like the Satan voice. I was like, oh my god, it's literally Satan. But yeah, I guess they could say that it's like, they could tie it together in next episode and be like, remember that time in the Impossible Planet where you sealed me in a black hole? I escaped. Could be cool. That could be a cool reveal. So next question, why can Ruby make it snow? And I don't think I have any satisfying answer to this yet. So I'm very interested. So we have a few pieces of information. I think that the reason she can make it snow has to do with the line that the Doctor said about like, yeah, like, what did he, actually, I guess I just have the quote here. We have given it the greatest power of all, memory. Time is remembered. Memory is time. So it's like talking about how memory and time are interconnected, and the fact that they're using a time window, which is like to relive a memory, but actually relive the time that the memory happened. And the fact that like, whatever, what was his name? General Tredozi or whatever his name was. Colonel Tredozi, how he interacted with the time window and died because of the things that happened in the past. It is something's going on with memory and time. I don't know what it's going to be, but I do feel like the snow is going to be related to the memory time dynamic. That's really all I have to have from this. But anyway, that one quote, we have that that TARDIS is almost solid. If time is memory and memory is time, then what is the memory of a time machine? I don't know what a memory. I guess it could be another universe, I guess. If you're remembering an entire timeline, you could branch off and create another reality, which is what creates like Susan Twist. Not Susan Twist. That's the actor. Susan Triad. Maybe? I guess you could do that. I don't know. I just thought of that on the fly. But it could be related to that, where it's like Susan Triad is having dreams, and the dreams memories of different times or something. And there's like, maybe the memory time thing could be more related to Susan and how she's split across all of space and time, I guess, creating different timelines. I don't know. I don't really know. Even if they never explain the Susan thing, I think that's completely fine with me. Because my headcanon right now is that like Sutekh did something to scatter across time because he's like a god, he can do whatever. He used some power, split her across time so that she could be everywhere, so that she can unleash the power of Sutekh all around the world all at once or something. All around the universe, sorry, all at once. That's good enough of a headcanon for me. I don't really need much more from that, but if they give more, I'm happy with it. Anyway, more of this Ruby Snow stuff. There's Maestro, who gives two particular things about Ruby, which is that there's a hidden song deep inside her soul. What is it? So it's like, oh my god, what does that mean? What is the soul? Does that mean she has like an intended purpose within her that's like embedded genetically or something? I don't know. And they also say, how could a song have so much power? And power like him, the oldest one, on the night of her birth, he can't have been there. What for? This creature is very wrong. So it kind of raises the question of like, who is the oldest one? Is the oldest one the mother? Is the oldest one someone else who was watching in the distance? Is the oldest one Sutekh? It's obviously not Sutekh. Crazy. Theories, I have no idea, okay? I don't know why Ruby makes it snow. The only thing I know is that it has something to do with memories, okay? All right, who is Mrs. Flood? Okay, this is probably the mystery that I'm the most interested in because there's a lot of potential for them to do something interesting. Because, you know, she's the only character really that's breaking the fourth wall. I guess besides Maestro, who was kind of breaking it with the theme song or whatever, but this is like a literal, she winks at us. She looks at us directly in the latest episode. There's something really interesting going on with her. So, the obvious answer. This is like the most, I didn't even need to put like a thing. She's obviously a TARDIS. It's so obvious that there's no way that she's the TARDIS or a TARDIS. It has to be a red herring. But this is like obviously the answer. And the clues are that, firstly, like I was saying, oh Jesus. When we first have the episode on Ruby Road in the Christmas special, we meet Mrs. Flood, and she just seems like a very normal person. And the TARDIS is like blocking her road, and she's like, what is this annoying TARDIS? Like, get out of the way. She doesn't say TARDIS. Like, what is this annoying box here? Get it out of the way, whatever. She's mad at her neighbor for it being there, and attributes it to him, I think. Then, one day she's coming back from the shops or something, and she's like walking down the road, and she sees the TARDIS, like the box in front of her, and the TARDIS like fades away and it like teleports, right? Because the Doctor is going to Ruby Road in the important scene where he has like a tear on his face or whatever. The Doctor is teleporting there now. And she's like shocked by it. She's like, oh my god, how'd this thing disappear? And she drops the groceries. And obviously she comes across as a very uninformed character before the Doctor goes and intervenes at the church on Ruby Road. So it feels like whatever the Doctor did when he goes to Ruby Road is what created Mrs. Flood. That seems like a very obvious thing. Now, it could just be that she's deceiving us and the whole time she was actually knowledgeable, but what seems more likely is that the events at Ruby Road created Mrs. Flood, or Mrs. Flood came from the events at Ruby Road. I think that's pretty clear. But I guess we'll see. I could be completely wrong, and that'd be crazy if they actually make it something else. But the two things for the TARDIS are that initially... Oh yeah, this is what I was talking about. Sorry, it's the first thing I was talking about. And then at the end of the episode, she's like, never seen a TARDIS before, and she winks at the audience. So it's kind of, you could read that as her being a TARDIS, like a sentient TARDIS or something. The second thing is that in the most recent episode, she says, it's nice for me to get out. I'm always hiding myself away. And it's kind of like, that's what a TARDIS does as a perception filter. So these two lines, along with the fact that something happens with the TARDIS at the church on Ruby Road, and she changes after that, all makes me feel like this is all tying into my theory of that the soul of the TARDIS was expelled into the mother. And which leads me, there's another thing, which is that Sutekh expels the TARDIS soul, is what I just said about, and pushes it into Ruby's mother, which leads to the crackpot theory, which is that Mrs. Flood, when she was younger, like back 19 years ago, whatever, she was Ruby's mother in the ordinary timeline. So she was just an ordinary woman who was dropping off her baby there. And eventually she goes and lives and finds Ruby and like lives next to her. She doesn't want to, she's kind of like a person who, she's like looking after she's not looking after her. It's like that thing where it's like someone adopts them, but they still want to like see their see their child who's grown up, but they don't want to like reveal themselves to her. So it's like technically her mother has been with her whole life, but she hasn't known it or whatever. That's the ordinary timeline. But then the Doctor goes back to the church on Ruby Road and allows Sutekh to expel the soul of the TARDIS, which is what I was saying, and that gets expelled into the closest person, who was Ruby's mother, who was there. So initially she was just a normal person, Mrs. Flood. Then the TARDIS gets pushed into her, and then she becomes like the possessed TARDIS person. And yeah, so I don't know. That's my grand theory, okay? That's what's going to happen. I'm telling you. I'm putting it down here. Mrs. Flood is the TARDIS and is Ruby's mother and is going to be a big deal when it comes to Sutekh, okay? It's all coming together. It's all going to be perfect and we're going to love it. Okay. Anyway. Wait, no, I think I have more actually. Wait. Oh yeah, there is more. Another possibility. Mrs. Flood is literally Ruby. Now, this is very unlikely because, you know, she's very old. She has a different accent, I think. She doesn't really look like Ruby, and we've also seen what Ruby looks like when she's older, so it wouldn't really make much sense, but I guess it's also not impossible. So it could be that, like, what I was saying before, which is that the Doctor goes back to the church on Ruby Road, and he goes back a second time where he is crying, which is the first opening scene to the church on Ruby Road, and he has to like hide Ruby away, and Ruby like grows up an entire life separate from the timeline that we've seen her in. She grows up in some other way and she becomes Mrs. Flood. Now, I don't know what the hell this has to do with anything, but it's not impossible, which is why I wrote it down, I guess. And then we have this, which is, I guess I'll say this before I read it, which is that why did the Doctor send Ruby to the time window? Like this implies to me that the Doctor already is on top of things and knows how to kind of resolve the situation with Sutekh, because he did say this thing at the end of the episode, which is like, Kate, get Ruby to the time window, and then the time window activated itself. And I feel like the Doctor has basically figured something out at this point, that either there's like something special with Ruby, or there's like the mother is like sending a message to get her to the time window, and that's why she's like pointing here, and like the solid TARDIS in the time window is like the key to undermining Sutekh or something. And to me, it just feels like the Doctor has already pieced together something important, which is why he sent her to the time window. But the other possible thing is that he realized that that's the safest place for her to be. Like maybe inside the time window, Sutekh can't do anything unless you literally interact with him, like the same way that General Trudozi did or whatever. Or it could be a thing that the Doctor realized that Ruby's mother is going to protect her against Sutekh and sent Ruby to Ruby's mother so that they can protect her or something. I don't know. I don't really have a solid theory for this, but I think this is an interesting thing that he did. And we'll definitely get an answer to this. And I think that's it. Now the Doctor needs to lose here, and Sutekh needs to stick around as a looming threat for another season. I would be shocked if that happened. It would be really cool. I'd like it, but I feel like I would bet like a lot of money, which I'm not going to, because, you know, what if I'm just wrong, but that this is going to get wrapped up in one episode. Now, it's possible that, like, I'm completely wrong about the Mrs. Flood stuff, and the Mrs. Flood stuff has nothing to do with the whole Sutekh stuff, which in that case, Mrs. Flood could carry over the next season, but I feel like I'm almost certain that Sutekh is just going to be wrapped up here. Has there ever been a season where the main villain has, like, continued on to the next season of Doctor Who, like, and has been the same mystery? Maybe. You had the Master doesn't really count. I don't know. Maybe there isn't, I'm just forgetting it, but it would be a bit weird to me. And the dialogue where Sutekh says he thinks death is good is sick. True, is like what you think is good is what you think is bad is what I think is good, and it's like the opposite or whatever. I like that concept. Sutekh's gift of death. Oh, there was also a few things they quoted, and a few random things they quoted. Like at the end of the episode of Pyramids of Mars, like the final part, the 4th episode, the Doctor references, "Oh, we gotta get out of here before we get blamed for a fire in 1666 or whatever," and in the episode, the 2nd episode of the specials, when they go visit Isaac Newton, I think, because I went back and watched that scene, because obviously Susan Triad is there. They also reference the fire in 1666. They're like, "Oh, don't go there," because I think the year was 1666 then, and like when Newton was there or something, and Donna was like, "Oh, don't go to the England or something," and I was like, "Oh wow, that's crazy that by coincidence this random date has tied into both the Pyramids of Mars and this like episode which is tied into Sutekh, which is related to the Pyramids." I was like, "What the hell's going on here? Crazy." Anyway. And there was also a direct dialogue which Sutekh said in the Pyramids of Mars, which was, he said something like, "I'm coming to destroy your precious planet," or something, which is literally what he said out of Susan Triad's mouth in the end of the Tale of Ruby Sunday episode, where he's like, "For your precious universe," or something. And I was like, whoa, they're quoting the old episode. That's crazy. Anyway, and the dialogue where Sutekh says he thinks death is good, Sutekh's gift of death. Oh yeah, they also say that in this episode, where it's like, "Sutekh's gift of death for your precious universe." I guess that's the line you were probably referring to. God, I remember like when the season started airing, my big theory was about how, like, at the end, where obviously throughout this whole season, we're going to see a bunch of gods, and like we've seen the Toy Maker, who's the god of games, we've seen Maestro, the god of music, and eventually we're going to see the god of like I don't even know what it is, the god of fourth walls or something, and the thing is going to be about how Doctor Who is going to break the fourth wall, and the whole episode, the finale, is going to be about how the Doctor is in a story, and it's all going to, I don't know what the hell the story would be, but I thought that this was going to be the time they actually do a whole episode on the Doctor Who being a show about Doctor Who. I don't know. Anyway, smaller details, okay? So there's a bunch of other small things and mysteries, which I don't really care that much if they get addressed, but they're like things that are interesting. So firstly, we have the whole thing where the Donna spills the coffee on the TARDIS, which leads to Mavity, which is like the whole thing that's been going on this, like a few episodes early on in the season, where the Doctor was like, everyone is basically saying Mavity instead of gravity, except for the Doctor, who knows that gravity is like a thing, which I don't know if that's important or not, or if it'll just continue to be a thing. And this whole event with the Mavity and Donna spilling the coffee leads to, in Wild Blue Yonder, the second special, I think, leads to the Doctor regenerating the TARDIS and causing the first time that the TARDIS groans, at least to my knowledge. I don't know if maybe it happens before that and I've just missed it, but it, like, as soon as he regenerates it, he has a moment where he's like, what is that? And it's like the TARDIS is groaning, and it's like, did something happen here? Is this when Sutekh like took over or something? So I don't know, this could be related somehow. We have in that Wild Blue Yonder as well, we have invoking a superstition at the edge of the universe where the walls are thin and all things are possible. Now, we initially assumed that this had to do with the Toymaker, which is what led him to coming into existence, but I guess it could also weaken the walls of the time corridor that is like trapping Sutekh, maybe, or I thought killing Sutekh, but that could bring him back, maybe. We have the Toymaker talking about two things here. He says, I played them all, Doctor. There's only one player I didn't dare face, the one who waits. I saw it hiding and I ran. That's someone else's game. And then my legions are coming. So I feel like what's going on here is that the one who waits is Sutekh, because they've waited, obviously, you know. And it seems like Sutekh is someone who even the Toymaker fears, which would kind of make sense if they're similar gods, but he is the god of all gods or something, and even the Toymaker fears them. And they don't even refer to his name. They say the one who waits, because they wouldn't even dare say Sutekh's name or something. I could see that working. So I could see the one who waits just being Sutekh. I think that's like pretty clear that it's Sutekh, but it could be someone else, I guess. And then the Toymaker also says, my legions are coming. And the only thing we've seen of that as a follow-up was Maestro, who is the Toymaker's child, right? I don't know if we'll get more of that or if it literally will end with Maestro, but yeah. Then we also get Maestro, who says some dialogue, which is that the one who waits is almost here. So I think that they're clearly talking about Sutekh here, because it kind of sounds like they're aware of this person. And it seems like because the Toymaker's aware, Maestro is aware, it seems like everyone is basically, all the gods are basically aware of Sutekh's return, which I think makes sense to me. Oh, I guess I don't have more here. Oh, this is the final like small mystery here, which is that the mention of the two perception filters interacting in 73 yards, which I thought was a very interesting concept that Kate brings up from Unit, which is that I wonder if it's connected, if landing a perception filter on top of that circle has affected things. Now, I very different to a lot of people who think that somehow this final episode is going to tie into 73 yards. I definitely don't believe that, and I definitely hope that that isn't the case, because I love 73 yards. But the concept that they brought up in that episode seemed like a strange thing to bring up, like a very niche, interesting detail that felt like you could do more with this. And I feel like maybe you could do more with that here with the TARDIS, and maybe Ruby's mother having some perception filter around her could cause an issue if there's like two perception filters interacting, and I don't know. Something interesting about that, I guess. But I think that's it. Oh yeah, just a summary. Ruby's mother. I think the go-to theory for me is that it's like some ordinary woman who had the soul of the TARDIS pushed into her, basically, is what I'm assuming. And I am hoping that we revisit the scene where the Doctor comes in and he's crying this time. And it's like, what? Oh my god, we got tricked. The beginning of the episode of this Christmas special was actually something in the finale. Oh my god. Ruby's snow ability, who knows? Probably has something to do with memory and time. Mrs. Flood is... What is the most likely Mrs. Flood theory? I actually don't really have a good theory, like one that I think is actually going to happen. She could literally be anything. I think the theory that she is initially shocked to see the TARDIS and the events that... I think it would be interesting if she was the mother. You know what? We're going to go with it, okay? Mrs. Flood, she's Ruby's mum. She's the TARDIS. She's Susan. She's everything, okay? And she's going to be the key to everything. It's going to be great. We're going to love it. The one who waits is Sutekh, and the oldest one is... I don't know. It could be the soul of the TARDIS. It could be... No, it couldn't be the soul of the TARDIS, because Maestro is like the oldest one. He was there at the day of her birth or whatever. I don't know, it's probably the god of light or god of life or something like that. I don't know. I don't really have a good solid theory. But anyway, it's Doctor Who. Crazy. I'm excited. A day or two until he comes out.